So this is Jeffrey's bio. Early in life, Jeffrey Grundtner passionately studied astronomy, earth sciences, and the physical sciences. However, because the science of astronomy dismisses the art of astrology outright, Jeffrey was skeptical of it. That changed when he received a book on astrology and was stunned by the connections he could apply in his own life. From there, he was hooked on astrology and began practicing professionally and giving lectures. Jeffrey's background in science gives him a unique perspective to his interpretation of astrology. There's so much more to his story, so I've linked his website on my chat, and you can read about him and then also find out how to contact him for readings, because his readings are absolutely specific to you and intense, personal, and very, very informative and helpful for your year forward. Or you can do many different charts, very experienced person. So I highly recommend him. I will let you take it away. So spotlight for everyone. There we go. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad to be back again. Thank you again for hosting me, the Theosophical Society. Great to see you. Some familiar faces. So we're, this has been a very wild year already. And I think, a couple of the comments that I made to Hope about the idea that we're in such a state of uncertainty and chaos, and that's how many of us are feeling that and experiencing it. And of course, it is being reflected in how what the planets are telling us in terms of what's going on with humanity. I want to emphasize once again that when we astrologers are looking at the planets and their movements out in the cosmos, the idea of as above, so below, because what it is really, to restate that, is that we're trying to discern how particular archetypes within the human experience are interacting. And so over the millennia, we've seen the connections between those archetypes within human experience and the movements of the planets. And that is a kind of a more practical way to say something about the notion of synchronicity and so on. As we often say, well, what are the planets doing to us now? And those planets, quote unquote, are the archetypes. Those are structures within the human psyche that are interacting. And it just so happens, by this amazing notion that we are one with the universe, and especially our local environment, i.e. the solar system, that these things tend to work out together, sometimes with pinpoint accuracy. On the other hand, there are some of these circumstances, and I'm going to make this too as somewhat of a preference, but there can be pinpoint accuracy, particularly with individuals and with certain interactions of planets, but with many others, there's a long, slow process that is going on in terms of how we're interpreting. So sometimes we think it's, for example, just to use a quick example, late last fall, everybody got all excited because Pluto moved into Aquarius and people were announcing the beginning of the Aquarian age. Well, it doesn't really work like that. Not when you have a planet that moves so slowly, it takes it 250 years, 248 years to go one revolution around the sun, which is Pluto. And and so many of the outer planets, we don't always see those results, not in pinpoint ways, but in long waves. So for those who have been following astrology, you may have heard about, well, there's all these shifts going on. The major planets are moving into different signs. And there's not to quote it again, but there's a bit of uncertainty even in that notion because of how we're kind of marking where those places are, but particularly because it's a wave, it's a slow movement, and how those kinds of energies within the human psyche and the collective human psyche take time. So we just had a Neptune ingress into Aries, and so there was some big deals made about that. And just the nature of Neptune and the notion of what does it mean when it moves into Aries, it's going to take time for us to feel that because it's not going to go into it in a very strong way until next year. And because of the nature of Neptune, which is very nebulous, diffuse, it's a very yin energy. It's all about the things like everything from glamour, some falsehood, to the highest expression of compassion and love, our collective soul, in a way. So, did we see that? Did we experience that? Did we wake up the next day? After I believe it was March 30th, yeah, or 29th or 30th, and go, oh, now we're in a different space. Perhaps, but I just want to emphasize that a little bit. And there are several of those planets that are moving slowly and are connected to the more collective movements. All of the outer planets, even though they do have an impact on us personally, they're often collective movements that are these things that are indicated that are big changes. Um, so having started with Neptune and what is the nature of it in Aries, because that was one of the most recent things to take place. Well, we will find out, but it is about individualizing. Aries energy is about putting forth from your own identity who you are into the world. It's a very projective, it's fiery energy. It's, the plants pushing up through the cold earth and through all the leaves and, coming into being for us in the Northern Hemisphere. That's Aries energy. It's putting yourself out there and being a pioneer and taking action. Rugged individualism can describe to some degree Aries energy. Being a leader because there's confidence. Doesn't always mean that you got the right strategy, but there's confidence in oneself. And so with Neptune there, we have the influence of, well, we can go at several ways to approach that. So one question that comes to mind immediately is that if this is about how am I putting myself out there as an individual, then Neptune has to do with your beliefs and your faith, your connection to the collective soul, your connection to the collective unconscious, which it has the realm of all possibilities. It's the space of both nightmares and the most glamorous dream and the most uplifted experience, spiritual ecstasy, if you will. So it's all of those things. And to anchor it just a little bit more, I've been naming glamour as one of those. Sometimes we include illusion and delusion, but it's those kinds of things. It's sort of like it's celebrity, show business, those things which they feed that desire for a different experience. But ultimately, if you want to look at it from a higher vibrational perspective, it's about bringing meaning into our lives and experience on a spiritual level. So if you're thinking about what does it mean to have Aries pushed to have Neptune move into Aries, is like for an individual, where are we putting your energy and your identity? And what are you putting forth about what you believe or the part of the collective soul that you want to bring forward? And how will you take action on that? Last time this happened in the 1860s, here in the United States, we had a civil war over the economic system of enslaving people. And the just the moral notion of that. And yet we had people fighting for such a horrific concept and maybe never really fully emerged from that because it is so stuck in the human psyche that some are superior or more important or more equal than others. And so here we are at this point in time. And one of those questions is, well, what beliefs are you willing to fight for? What beliefs are you willing to hold within your identity that you're going to put forward? And so, in a sense, this is what's happening collectively in the human soul, which is one of the reasons why these times, really for the whole planet, I'm going to tend to focus somewhat on the United States because this is where most of, I believe, pretty much everybody here. Some others might be talking about the rest, other parts of the world. It affects the whole world, obviously. And of course, the adage too that, if the United States sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold, and we just witnessed that. So that's one element to be clear about. And Neptune will transition, it'll retrograde back into Pisces for a while. And that's going to represent, so you're going to be pushing yourself forward through these next several months about what are your beliefs and what are you willing to act on in those beliefs? And how are you going to solidify that in your identity? It's kind of not a time to be all that wish-washy. But then when it moves back into Neptune, that is a more expansive and reflective space. And so it's going to be kind of like real strong breathing out. This is who I am and what I believe in, speaking as an individual, but we can speak as humanity as well, to the notion of the broader perspective. And then there's going to be a breathe in. What does that mean? There's going to be a reaction. What does that mean? And how do I put that into a larger context? And where might there be things that we're going to have to be sacrificed in order to move into the future that we want to create out of this realm of all possibilities? What is the new earth that we want to dream into being? What is the way that we want to live with our fellow human beings? With compassion and acceptance. I'm gonna be putting a lot of my own. I can't really fully represent this without inserting my own beliefs into it. So just be aware that's kind of, that's going to come through. I will do my best to just tell you what the energy is, but if you can't figure that out, I believe in all people being that we are all equal, children of the Creator. And it's an important time for those reasons. So that's a key thing about Neptune, and Neptune plays a key role. Throughout this whole year and moving into next year. And a nearly opposite energy, if you will, because Neptune, it has no form. It's like the fog that we can impress with our minds any form that we want on it. It shifts and moves through the woods and creates mystery and things like that. And that's Neptune. Well, Saturn energy is about what is solid and what is in the real world, what is in time and space. Even though we're all connected here electronically, we're existing together in the same time. And so, from that standpoint, Saturn is present, even though we're not in the exact same space, we're in the same time. And everything that has to do with arriving in a manifestation has to do with the kind of Saturn energy and how we hold that together. So it extends to our ideas about institutions, um, the literally the infrastructure, how we're operating in the world, and it tends to be the things that are going to endure and uh, allow us to function altogether. But and it represents the authority that holds that structure, that holds that hierarchy together. Earlier I commented on the Aquarian age without going into great detail, but one of the impulses of the Aquarian age is to really bring forward this idea of we are all created equal. We all have the opportunity to be expressly who we are as individuals. And yet we have to somehow find a way to live together so that one individual's ideas are not impinging on another's. And that is no small task. We got a lot of work ahead. Um, and and in the past millennia, there was always a notion of as civilization took form, there was the tendency to take from, in my view or perspective, to borrow from biological systems. And so we had, one individual, and then later some groups of individuals or whatever. But there's the tendency to have one individual kind of be at the head of that. And if we're going to pursue an Aquarian ideal, that will go away. And I think that I'm going to just make the statement right now that I'm going to make more comments about some of the chaos we're experiencing in the breakdown of Saturn, the breakdown of structures, the breakdown of institutions, even our systems of thought that, this is a process that's been going on now for the last several years, maybe even decades, but acutely in the last 5 years. That the Aquarian age, we're going to have to find that a more horizontal way of living and having responsibility and accountability to each other while being able to express that. I think maybe I'm repeating myself and I lost my train of thought. Apologize, but hopefully that made sense. But the part of that process is that old way of structuring things has to break down. And that started in earnest in 2020 when Saturn and Pluto were conjunct, and Pluto is about transformation. It's about a death rebirth process. So all the stuff that's been going on since then, all across society, not just in governments. I mean, we're seeing some things in the course of governments with the rise of dictatorships all over the world, and the appeal back to that old way. And where does that exist? This old way, this notion that there is some great leader that is going to save us or be the one that can make all of the decisions that will, create order and it'll all be good. It's held in that realm of all possibilities, if you will, in the collective unconscious. It was where, going way, way back, there was a feeling of safety. There was a feeling of safety that came from existing in a tribal circumstance. And not every tribe had like one leader. Often they had, multiple levels to it. So I'm kind of, I'm not trying to be 100% universal. I just wanted to make a point that the systems of government that seem to be rising now, um, and the systems of like the dictatorships versus those systems of government which are about the people, which are supposedly the principles that the United States was founded on, and we have been working for 250 years to continue to live up to those principles. Yet that all human beings are created equal, and we are a part of nature, and we've been endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And those principles that we have been working to live up to, um, that is counter to the notion of, monarchies that existed for the longest time, and for, elite control, these kinds of structures. And so that's the kind of thing that is really heating up. And we have been in a cauldron for the past several years, and we will be for several more. And that existence in the collective unconscious, as we're in states of fear and we're reaching for the dream space, we're reaching for something to have faith in that will come forth and save us. Have faith, Neptune, come forth and save us. And the tendency then is to not have to feel that we as individuals are responsible. And yet we are. That is what the impulse, in terms of at least the way I read it, that's been the impulse for several hundred years, is more individual equality and self-rule, or rule by, for, and of the people through a system of laws. That's the Saturn part. The system of laws are those things that are supposed to hold it all together and keep it all together. And so there's a sense, too, that these things have gotten very unwieldy and difficult and distant in the past few years. And then there was a focus through things that were not entirely factual, but were maybe felt because of that distance and feelings of inequality and all of the different things that come up, that it wasn't working. It wasn't working. And so that it needed to break down to that idea that those structures needed to break down, or at least to transform. So all of that's been present. And Saturn has been moving through Pisces as another indicator of that. So it was conjunct Pluto in 2020 in Capricorn. So all of those systems were really starting to be brought into the cauldron, and the essence, the core essence, which was what was supposed to emerge, what we would hope would emerge. But in two of the things that were possibilities to happen in that circumstance was, what does conjunct mean? It means the two planets are coming together, and those energies are combined. It is like it's a conception. It's like there's a new conception. So Saturn being the systems and the institutions, everything from church institutions to government institutions to healthcare institutions to anything where we have set up the ways of organizing our life so that it makes sense, that we know how to go down the road and get to the store and get the items that we need and how they're going to arrive. That's a structure that we've created to serve us. Pluto comes along. Pluto is this energy of death and rebirth. It's this transformation. And what it does is it strips away the kinds of things that maybe are really not working. And for you to get to the core essence, when we have a personal Pluto transit, it often strips your resources away to find out what's at your core. What's that fire that burns inside you, and how are you going to rebirth it? And that's kind of the process that was begun in 2020, and it's not even fully complete. Um, I won't go into technical details as to why some of these things have continued, but we're now in this position where Saturn, which moves quite a bit faster than Pluto in terms of the planets, so we have to maintain a structure. We have to be able to make sense of our world. And so for a while, it was in a position of like reconstituting. But two of the possibilities were that there would be more empowerment, more collective empowerment in our institutions and structures, or conversely, those with authority or have power over the current structures could consolidate their power. Those were two of the tracks, and we have a mixture probably. We would have had a mixture of both, although it would appear to me that what is what has risen more is those with the power have consolidated it, and it's whether it's the oligarchs or the the people at the head of the government or whatever, they have tried to consolidate power more into more individuals and more positions of authority than the leveling out of empowering more people. So that to me is one of the tasks with Pluto moving into Aquarius, which happened during the formation of the United States. Not at the time of the Declaration of Independence, but remember, it took 13 years before we had a constitution. And that constitution was a compromise. And then there's, I won't go into a whole lot more details, but the government was not formed until a government structure was not formed until 1787. First Congress wasn't seated until March 4th, 1789. The first president was not inaugurated until April 30th, 1789. And the first Supreme Court did not sit until 1790. So those are dates to which we can refer back to. We often say, well, we just had our Pluto return. The United States wasn't a country yet. We just declared that we were going to separate. It was a birthing because, we told the king, F you, and we're going on our own thing. But we had to fight. We had to fight to get to a place, and then we had to come together as a people in order to create a system of government. So there's these broad periods of time, 13 or 14 years that it took to form, and there's going to be 13 or 14 years where there's going to be impacts of transformational impacts within our country, and it'll be broader than that. So when we declared independence, Pluto was in Capricorn, and so that's past now, but we'd formed the government when Pluto was in Aquarius. And the Aquarian ideal, that all human beings are created equal. I'm not reciting it the way they wrote it, but rather the rewrite that I did last year, for what it's worth. I'll recite that maybe later. But the idea all human beings are created equal, that's a Pluto and Aquarius idea. And we've got 20 years to work on that, roughly. And Neptune being in Aries, I've already commented on, is that what beliefs are you going to live in your identity, and what are you willing to put forward? I use the term fight, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean a fight, but it does mean, like like that plant that has to push up through all the leaves and the duff and all of that to get to the light, or through the crack in a sidewalk to get to the light. That's the way that I am suggesting from the astrology, because I know I'm making big pronouncements here. We have to be doing that. Or these powers that have consolidated, those entities that have consolidated their power out of this old, broken down, decrepit idea that the few should rule the many. If we don't do that, we will lose this Aquarian idea of we're all being empowered and that we are all created equal. For how long, I don't know, but long enough. It's a fairly critical time, I would say, in these next 2 years. And we're beginning to get the taste of that. And, again, referencing we here in the United States, the April 5th, was it? A lot of people pushing back on what we're experiencing. I recognize that there's a lot of people who are still behind what's going on, but who still support that idea. But that is the whole. I told you my beliefs and ideas. I'm not going to necessarily shy away from them, but I do want to give you that idea that's a lot of people are drawing from that sensibility, and they may feel just as right as I do that there should be, this other system, that we should be strictly focused on economy rather than, economy of individuals rather than the well-being of all. I have nothing against the wealth of individuals, but the well-being of all should be number one. Again, my opinion. So I'm going to reference these things in a beginning. So I'm touching on, Pluto in that has moved into Aquarius, the Neptune into Aries, and there's this whole pile up of planets there still, because Saturn is in Pisces currently. It will move into Aries soon. And what does that mean? Again, this notion of pushing forward, individual. What will you get into? This is the question to ask yourself as an individual, as well as where does it go collectively? Because Saturn within ourselves as individuals, you're going to have your own individual Saturn. You're going to be in your own cycle, etc. But in general, where are you going to stand with your authority? How are you going to structure your life from the standpoint of you being the author of your own book, of your own life? And how will that contribute to the overall structures, the ways by which we will live? And what boundaries, for example, what boundaries will you set that, will, they eventually can be translated into societal, but you need to start with yourself. And when it moves into Aries, it's an important time to be clear. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And how am I going to put that out into the world? Now, looking around here, most of us are, in our latter years, but it's still a good time to ask that question. It's never too late to be asking that question. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And what am I going to do about it in this world? How am I going to be present? in time, those two planets, in other words, those two aspects of human experience, those archetypes of Saturn, how do we structure our world? How do we uh, respect authority, the authority of ourselves, and the authority that we give to others uh, in their in their respective positions? It's very important. It's hard for us to have authority if we're not respecting the authority of someone else in their position. Uh, but how will we live with that, and what it is that we are dreaming and that we believe in and we have faith in? Eventually, those are going to come together in 2026. And we're going to be getting tastes of that all throughout the year. So if I were to condense that, your dream of the new earth, and how are you going to put that into presence, into manifest being? Those are the energies that we are working very strongly with. um, and before I move on to the next thing, I just want to let you sit with that one for a minute. You know, what is it that you dream of in terms of how you want to be in the world? How are you going to structure it for yourself? And what are you willing to fight for that is what we will live with and what we will leave? You know, I'm so focused myself on future generations, always have been, but as I've aged, it's about those future generations, especially. I want to take a little pause and just check because I noticed there were more things in the chat and I only saw the one. Somebody was asking, what does it mean that they're conjunct? Was there anything else, Hope, that I needed to pay attention to? Any questions that I needed to respond to?
Well, just the question of what does retrograde mean, which is kind of a big question. And I said it's the appearance of a planet appearing to move backwards in the sky, and that has implications for energy that each of the planets has a different result for each of the planets. And I know Mercury retrograde, but I don't know the other ones. So
Okay, fair enough.
you were talking about this specific one.
Yes, so the planets have periods of time when they appear, as you just said, when they appear to be moving backwards in the sky. But what is the result for us with our uh, um, with the archetypal energy within us that it represents? And a lot of people are familiar with Mercury retrograde because it's, you know, it kind of messes up our communications and our plans and whatnot. And, you know, Mercury having a lot to do with the communications and the order in which we think. And when Mercury is retrograde, um, it allows more of the subconscious material to come forward. And the ordinary way of moving, speaking, communicating, and things like that is taking a pause. It is going into a state of review. And while that is happening, if we're continuing to try to push in the same way that we always do, we're going to mess it up because subconscious material that we have set aside is coming forward, and the universe is asking us to do a review and take some time to stop pushing in one direction. It doesn't mean we stop life, but it means that you kind of, you know, take a moment and maybe what's going on in these deeper levels of our minds, you know, what needs expression. And there's all other kinds of consequences. I don't want to spend too much time on Mercury retrograde because I'm not speaking of Mercury retrograde, but rather these outer planets. Can they move basically because the Earth is bypassing them? I don't know if I can do this with my hands, but you know, if the Earth is here and it's spinning around like that, this planet's moving pretty slowly. It doesn't actually go backwards, but because the Earth does this thing, Yeah, I don't know if that's useful. But anyway, because the Earth does that, it looks to us like it's going backward. But see, everything is vibration. Everything is frequency. So there's this feeling of like, you know, maybe you're riding the one part of the wave and then you're shifting back to a different part of the wave. I don't know if surfing metaphor works for us, but I'll think of something. Anyhow, so the idea is the modality will shift. We have Neptune in Aries now. So what's being brought forth out of from a strong collective manner and therefore pushing us as individuals are the things that I spoke of. What do you believe in? How do your beliefs form your identity? What are you going to push you forward with in the world according to those beliefs? What part of the collective soul are you going to express in yourself? When it moves back into Pisces, then it's more in the dream space. Well, I wish it was this way. I dream it was this way. And I'm not trying to diminish the power of our dreams. They are very powerful. Those are the interconnecting frequencies with the collective soul. And if you will, with those aspects of the collective soul, I believe most human beings are trying to call on universal love and compassion and being able to live here in those high spiritual principles, to live our lives in that. That's what I believe. I don't know that all human beings share that, but I know many beliefs and systems of religion do. So, so you're going to go back into a space when Neptune appears to be moving backward, where there's a phase shift, if you will, with that wave, and we're going to go back into, all right, if I go back into the dream space, how am I going to imagine it now? How will I recreate? How will I draw forth in this place where everything is malleable? I can draw on it. Well, you may, some of us find ourselves in despair or depression. That's there. Some of us want to escape. That's Neptune. I want to escape hard reality, you know, by doing more social media or doing, I mean, turning to alcohol or turning to, something that gets you out of having to deal with the harsh realities that are many of us are experiencing. I don't know about everybody, but there are a lot of harsh realities out there on the planet right now. Southern
Um,
Sudan, Ukraine, Gaza. Um, those we there's this tendency to want to pull back from that, but rather than going into a state of despair or calling on that, when we can, uh, you know, I, I was going to state this kind of in summary, but I'm going to insert it right here, is that this is a time period of being very aware of caring for yourself, for your body, your emotions, and your mind, and caring for your community, because it's those community connections that will help you to stay sane and to find the element of of truth, well-being, supportive of those beliefs, and how you can amplify your action. And caring for the planet, care for self, care for your community, care for the planet. And so when we feel Neptune wanting to pull us away from the reality, go there intentionally. Go there with the idea that I want to dream the vision of the life I want to live. I want to dream the vision of the life I want to leave my grandchildren. Don't go there to escape. Try not to. I mean, I'm not going to, sorry. I always throw those caveats in because I sound like I'm preaching at times, like, you got to do this. You can do whatever you want, right? But I would hope that you would do this with that sense of, you know, what is that shining light that we want to pursue? And what is my part in it? And then come back into the reality and shine that light into the world, you know. Um, So that period of time will be a more reflective time, but these other planetary movements may not let us stay in a state. A lot of humans will probably choose escapism or giving up. One of the aspects of this, and this came out, with a client that I had today, there's a certain clarity is that while the systems break down like that, it shows us how dependent we are. Even if we believe that some of them needed to change or that they didn't feel like they were responsive to us, how wholly dependent we are, interdependent on each other, and dependent on our sense of reality, Saturn again, on those systems and structures that exist. And when they start breaking down, we feel powerless. And, because we've, again, coming back to the United States, we have been trying to build this system where it was a government by, for, and of the people. And when we've lost faith or lost touch with the structures that are holding that possibility, as flawed as it may be, we have lost power. And that is the sense of where we are in this state, as the was passed out in the email, and I might have stated at the beginning, the sense of this feeling of chaos. And so now I want to there. I'm just going to insert a little caveat. There is so much to actually cover in what's going on. I'm going to be hitting a few highlights and hope that that I have something that is of coherence to offer you. But I'll throw little tidbits out there as we go along about the importance of these times and how we might interact with them. But I want to turn for a moment to chaos. So there is this. I'm going to preface this with the idea that the way uh, the planets have been named. Obviously, the ones that we know the most were named, thousands of years ago, and a lot of those Greek myths, a lot of it borrowed from the Babylonians and Sumerians, and went through transmutations and stories from Egypt and all over, at least all over from the old world. Another little caveat: I'm really keenly interested because of my own particular path, but that we, start exploring the understandings of other peoples, because the meanings that they found in their relationship to the sky was reflective of who they were and who we are. So, having said that, since these have connections to, reiterating that, connections to the constructs within the human psyche, like what does it mean to have a certain order and structure and hierarchy? We've been talking about Saturn. Um, uh, and other there's I don't want to go through a whole bunch of different planets and how they exist within us, so I'm just going to kind of leave it there. But these archetypes evolve as we evolve. Some of the things that the Greeks believed in their stories, even though they're sometimes really quite useful, we as human beings have changed. Sometimes not very much, but we have changed. And because those are constructs within ourselves, within our own collective psyche, we are informing the archetypes as much as they inform us. So when we look out to an archetype, an archetypal energy represented by a planet, Mars is an example. I'm going to comment on Mars here in a little bit. There's two places I want to go yet: to the dwarf planet Eris and to what's going on with Mars. And Mars being, considered one of the inner planets and more personable, not personable. He's not very personable, generally speaking, but it's a personal planet. It's how about how we go about getting what we want. It is our energy. Aries is Mars's natural domicile. So Mars within each one of us is about how you're creating your identity and you're putting your energy out into the world, how you're pioneering and becoming uh, who you are, and how you go about getting what you want in life. But it's also about, protecting life at its higher expression. Its higher expression is, uh, you know, protecting and problem solving. And so it's not just the god of war. So this is an example of how things, even though warrior societies, many of them had these tremendous codes of ethics. I mean, to be a warrior meant you had discipline and you had control, and you were giving, in the Ojibwe, I don't know if I stated it in this group before, in the Ojibwe, word for warrior is Okechida, and that is one with a big heart, one who has such a big heart that they is willing to serve the people. That's a that and that is representative of what's expected. That isn't just about going out and being a warrior, but one of providing, protecting, and having the discipline to use that kind of power in a judicious way. That's a higher expression of Mars. But we also know that Mars has lower expressions. If somebody it is their energy is thwarted, they get angry and they fight. And so, anyhow, um, since I already started down that one, I wasn't going to do that one first, but I'm going to now because I'm talking about it. So Mars is that kind of is the energies I just expressed, and um, and is often associated with uh, masculine energy, and in the parlance of today, there's divine masculine and divine feminine, and these because they were associated with men and women, but it to be really clear, these planetary energies are part of the human experience. They live in all of us. And so they just come out, can express differently in each of us. I believe we're in a time of great transformation of those things too, so that the structures, the Saturn aspect that said if you're this, if you're a man, then you're this, if you're a woman, then you're this. Okay, so those things have been being broken down and brought into a more fuller human dynamic in many decades. We still have a long ways to go in really establishing the Hieros Gamos. Like, how do we live that? And if you're in a masculine body like mine, then I'm going to express more of that, and my more feminine aspects might be less visible, but they live together in synergy rather than, one or the other. And and the whole range thereof. But given that, and given that I've talked about these archetypes go through transformation, as we as human beings do, there was the idea that, hey, men shouldn't be the only ones running the world, by the way. And women are running it, but from this back place, from this, from the backseat place, women are also helping run it. Well, let's all bring everybody all together in circle or forward or whatever. But it's been this back and forth, and we find ourselves now in more of the uh, a gender war. Progress has been made, but there's been this kind of a resurgence. Uh, and that's kind of a whole other topic. I don't want to go too deeply into that. I may be doing some other videos to share some of my ideas about that. Other than we see this strongly expressed And again, with reference to what's going on socially by uh, um, well, I guess I will make a little bit of a comment because amongst the men or the male expression that weren't finding an adequate new model to find their male expression, and for many, uh, and to some degree myself included, although I've never changed my opinion of equality, but the more um, militant feminists, which are also, you know, men are bad per se. And so we've seen this response to that. And both of those energies come from the same place, of one being superior over the other in a hierarchical place. And it might have been that, feminist was an appropriate response to the patriarchy that was existing. But then if it didn't move into how are we going to turn towards each other and create something new, and so now there's this other resurgence, which is kind of a horrible place to be. And yet, what's going on in the planets, what is being suggested, is that Mars and that impulse of how do we use that, what we call masculine energy, how do we use that Mars energy in a positive way? We have the choice to learn how to use it in a way that is uh, empowering to the collective, or one that is trying to have power over the collective. They're in an opposition. Okay, so these, in terms of the astrology of it, Mars has been opposite Pluto. Remember, Pluto's death and rebirth, but it's also about power. It's about empowerment, uh, uh, ideally. But those who take uh, power over or to take collective power to use, um, that's somebody using their Mars energy. It's all about me, and what I want, and using the collective power to accomplish that. That is the most base, crude level expression of Mars opposite Pluto. And they get pissed off, and now I want to have control over you. Well, the other way to view that is, how do these things work together? How do you use your own energy for putting yourself out there, for expressing your identity and your right to exist, and to have the freedom to be who you are in a way that empowers the collective? And how can you encourage the collective to empower you to be that? And so now we're moving in a whole different, we're moving in the lemniscate space, in the infinity space, rather than pushing against or pulling against. And so what do we see in the world is more of the former, because that's the way we've always done it as human beings. One person expressing and then they become emperor and whatever. Historically, that was there was kind of this. Well, I don't know. Never mind. I was going to talk about Napoleon. I mean, after Pluto in Aquarius and all that rebellion against monarchies and obscene wealth amongst the elite and everything, and trying to have a more equalitarian societies. But then Bonaparte anointed himself emperor and just reconstituted the same old nonsense that human beings seem to have to fight with. Let's hope we don't have to go through that again, ever. But that's one of the key things. So this is more, again, it's very much like the things I was expressing earlier, is how are you going to use your individual power, and can you use it in a way that supports collective empowerment, that allows the freedom of the individual to be who they are. we need to get really creative about that because the old structures are breaking down, and we have this feeling of powerlessness that some of those same places, they just don't work anymore. I mean, um, there's the notion in terms of politics, and I've been talking quite a bit about that, about at least about government. And politically, we're not going to get another vote. We're not going to get to vote on anything for a while. So that's not really an opportunity to exercise our power. We've got to exercise it in other ways right now. And in the Aquarian ideal, as I've expressed it, one of the things that we Aquarians do, and the Iranian thing, we'll fight if we have to, but generally speaking, we just go do something else. We innovate. Can we go, go have your piss and match. I'm going to do something different. So that Aquarian ideal of, who's your community? Where do you want, and how do you work together, can support each other to get common goals done? And what might that be? And don't, the suggestion here, again, my opinion, but the old way was just to push against, protest and push against. And it has validity, and it has worked, and it has moved things in the past. But we're in a position now where we can be more empowered horizontally by simply using it and doing something different, and allow the things to crumble and have more things to replace it. So it's always hopeful to me. I'm particularly concerned about what's going on with our environment, with the planet, and so on. And so when I watch these science shows where people are doing amazing things, where they're going back to the most brilliant archive there ever was, which is Mother Nature, all the knowledge of how we need to live a good life, to live our lives on the planet exists there. And when they find ways to bring that forward and back into the fold, and they're doing amazing things, and these are hopeful things. And we don't even necessarily hear about them in the media, where we're supposed to be being informed citizens. But that's an example of an Aquarian thing, where like we know there's a problem. We know that Earth's system is changing in a very dramatic way. And how can we form communities that can help create something different? Because as the old crumbles, something has to arise to replace it. And for the most part, we're in one of those positions. Some of it is going to be, gradual change or evolution, but humanity seems to have chosen so many times to not be able to do that. We tend to have to go through complete breakdowns. But maybe this time there'll be some blend of that. So what systems can help us do that? The internet is both a system that can be used to control, or a system that equalizes, and we have the opportunity to organize with it, just as a little example. But how will we change the nature of that Martian expression? So it's maybe not so much that the first choice is to go to war, but to be a protector, to stand with the people, man or woman or whatever, doesn't matter the gender, but to be a protector. And Mars energy right now has been in Cancer for quite a long time. So there's that protector energy, and that idea of that, well, let me just finish that. The protector energy the warrior protector energy moving in the sense of protecting the family. Now, on a crude level, that can be, well, it's just my family or my people. And again, we can see that in political terms where it's like, you know, um, all right, I'm just going to say it, America first. Not a bad thing on its face, but when it doesn't include, you know, the whole planetary family of humanity, and then I would extend it to the whole family, Matakiape, of all life on the planet, um, then it's a problem, in my view. But as in and of itself, it's that idea of can you protect? Are you using that energy to protect your family? And that's one manifestation, which is I'm going to draw these boundaries and I'm going to exclude everybody that isn't of this belief and this appearance and what have you, and I'm protecting the family. Or are you going to, or will we choose to allow Pluto to transform that energy and to see that thing broadened more to the idea that I just expressed, is that we're protecting the life like a mother protects the family. She's there and she's, what that mother bear syndrome. Well, it's that family. But if we begin to expand that into the notion of how are we connected, and we're putting empowering energy into that, then maybe we are then feeding that Mars archetype. And how do we call that forward? And how do we honor that? And how do we respect that in any opportunity we have? Because that's where it comes from. Pluto energy, it sounds mysterious, but really it's any way that you empower. Let's say, to give a really concrete example, you see somebody doing something that's a little heroic. Uh, I saw a video the other day or maybe it was today or whatever, it was a reel where a guy jumped down to pull a man off of the subway tracks, and work on reviving him. And that was an example, a real life example of a hero, right? That's a heroic thing for another person. And what empowers that? He got the support of the people around him that, way to go. And he got rewarded for that. That's taking the power we have as individuals. We may not have been the guy that jumped down there to do it, but if we honor it and we respect it and we show our support for it, that's a way of using our collective power, that element of Pluto, that little aspect of Pluto that we're giving to support that. The other concrete example of how the Pluto energy works is, Pluto has to do with our taxes. And whether you agree with all of the ways our taxes are used, it's only through the collection of all of that money that we are able to do big things that we can't do as individuals or even as small communities. So in principle, taxes are a Plutonian thing. It's about collectively using power to accomplish things. So that one little example, and even more, I'm saying extend it to life. What if you just see somebody who stops their car and gets out and picks up the turtle to help it across the road so it doesn't get smashed? Yay! Applaud it, give them a thumbs up, give them a little horn, thank you. And then they're feeling some of that collective empowerment. I did a good thing. They probably already know. But that's a way for us to support things. These are little tiny concrete examples. So let your imagination work. Well, how can we support those that are doing things, that are taking action in ways that are protective and extending that to the more collective family. Can it will become more acute and the energy will express differently very soon as Mars is it's not exactly opposite Pluto right now, speaking astrologically. It gets there. I'd have to double check the date as to when that's going to occur. There's a bunch of things that are happening the end of April, the beginning of May. Um, I won't take I will if you want me to look up when it's exact, but these things tend to flow too. But what will manifest in the world will give us an example because we are likely to see some of the negative manifestations of that as well. It could be, you know, somebody from their own selfish position trying to assert power and go cause a war or an acceleration of war of some kind. But it can also, we can choose within ourselves and within our community, within our psyche, to fight for something different that is more collectively empowering. So that is a another important thing. And so what I the last thing that I want to give some space to is the idea, what we started out with, this idea of chaos. And there is the dwarf planet that is kind of the equal of Pluto in some ways, but has a very, very different expression, and it was only recently discovered. I tended not to use the dwarf planet Eris, Eris, which is the goddess of chaos that manifests as strife and discord. I haven't really been using it until recently because it was like, man, we are sure are in a chaotic period. Is this happening? What's happening? And how does it work? But I'm also, um, uh, I wouldn't say a skeptic, but as a scientist, I'm like, I want to test this out. We haven't known much about this. And we, I want to do a little sidebar here is that we understand how things get named because there's actually thousands of bodies that are being discovered now that are part of our solar system. And are they all going to have some kind of archetypal energy attached to them? That's pretty questionable. So, what does it mean? And it isn't relative, it isn't necessarily about its size or anything like that, because Pluto is not a huge planet. And if anybody's experienced a Pluto transit, if you've ever gone and with an astrologer and sat down and talked about Pluto, man, it's a pretty intense energy. So we know that there's some correlation. There is a resonance in the human psyche with the movements of Pluto, and it seems to relate to what we've come to understand it, even though we've only known about it for a little less than 100 years. We can go back and track and see. Um, and there again, the Greek and Roman myths and those before it, um, they go through a bit more transformation, and that's the important work that as astrologers and as depth psychologists, um, we should be, in my view, applying ourselves to updating how are they actually functioning in humanity right now, and what are the stories that will match it. And any time that they work for us or with slight rewrites, maybe they will continue to serve us. And so Eris discovered in 2005. And as I said, the goddess of chaos. But the way that it got named is that I'm going to get the acronym wrong and the full name, but it's basically there's a kind of an international astronomical society. That's the rough name, and it's got an acronym. And it was in 2005 that when they discovered Eris, and they went, well, gee, it's almost as big as Pluto, and it actually is more dense. So is this a planet? It's 560 years for it to make one revolution around the sun. So the first thing that Eris disrupted was how science defines a planet. And that's when supposedly, you know, Pluto got demoted. It's no longer a planet. Well, it didn't go anywhere. And in the astrological terminology, a planet is, yes, we're observing the motions, but we're referring to how the human is in a resonant response to that. So, but that was the first thing that it disrupted, and they had to redefine, well, what does it mean to be a planet? You know, and it has to clear its path, and it has to be spherical, and blah, 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 blah. There's all those things. But by so doing, they adopted a whole other model that includes many of these other bodies that we're discovering. And the criteria that they used is when a body is discovered and they start, you know, its first of all, it's going to get just a number. And then the discoverers will propose a name, but it has to be a name that, at least currently, is a reference to something that, looking at not just Greek, Roman, or any of these others, but all the cultures of the world, some entity or being or something that exists in their mythologies that relates to creational stories. And that isn't just real simple creational things, but complex creational things. Like you might wonder, how is the goddess of chaos part of a creational story? And particularly the story that is most attached to it, which I'll recount in a minute. But it's the Greeks also stated that out of chaos the world is born. And as our own understanding, you know, we probably all have heard of the idea of chaos theory now, where we're really trying to investigate and what on our macro scale we see as chaos, and there's no order yet, but that somehow it starts to form an order by some invisible notion, some invisible field that exists, morphogenic field or whatever terminology, God, goddess beneath that. And then it finds its way into form, it finds its way into order. But it starts as chaos. Okay? So that way it can be a creational force in and of itself. And the story, however, that well, actually, let me stick with the planetary stuff because we mentioned that I have this scientific background. So in some ways, I find it fascinating what this reordering resulted in 2005. And they were going, well, what are we going to do? There's all these bodies out here, and what's really a planet? So there's a new called a NICE model, NICE, of planetary, our understanding of the formation of the solar system and planetary nomenclature. So the early on in the solar system, the gas giants formed closer to the sun, and then they migrated further out. And as they did, they pushed smaller bodies out, and they pushed some of them in. And one of the very interesting things that occurred is that Neptune was originally closer to the sun than Uranus, and they traded places. And so to me now, and this is all science, but my mythic mind is going, whoa, what does that mean? And does it have an influence on how we understand these bodies now within humanity? That, you know, because Uranus is very, very yang, it's very electrical, it's very individual, and it exists. All of the outer planets beyond Saturn exist outside of time constructs, you know, but and Uranus can exist outside of time, but it's about becoming it's about individual revolutionary. Neptune is this whole other, like I said, this dream space or whatever, and more connected to the collective unconscious. Uranus is connected more to the collective superconsciousness, where all the thoughts of the world exist. And in a way, the internet is starting to create a manifest space of the collective superconsciousness. The fact that we can, ask AI to go out there and pull all this data in and create a story is a manifestation of that. It's coming from the superconsciousness. And and the two work together. In fact, the internet started to take off when Neptune was conjunct. There was a conception between Neptune, the dream world, and Uranus, the superconscious world, in 1993. It's another story. But we're beginning to experience this as it unfolds, this 171-year cycle. And now it's moving into this other space. But back to that early evolution, as the planets moved out, Neptune in particular, again, collective unconscious, the human psyche or human soul, was moving out, and many of those bodies were pushed into what is known as the Kuiper belt. So they're within the gravitational influence of Neptune. And in fact, Pluto is in an orbital resonance with Neptune. So the notion of Pluto, which is about death and rebirth, has, in a way, it's incorporated in our collective psyche. Even if we may not like it, we understand it, and we know that life goes through this death and rebirth, and these things go on. So that resonance is a 2 to 3. For every 3 times that Neptune goes around the sun, Pluto goes around twice. It's 2 to 3. All right. Now, when we get to Eris, Eris is not in that space. It's not gravitationally influenced in the same way that all of those bodies in the Kuiper belt, all of those ice worlds, the Pluto, which is the iconic one. It's outside that. It's in the scatter disk, because as Neptune moved out further out into the solar system, and it pushed all those smaller bodies out, Kuiper belt is organized, but beyond that is the scatter disk. Those bodies are continuing to be perturbed and scattered outward, and not just in one plane like most of the solar system, but in other very eccentric orbits. So now enters Eris. 560 years, 559 to 560 years, has a very inclined orbit, and it exists in the scatter disk. It's not part. It's not influenced in the same way. It's not bound to our collective unconscious. So the notion that Eris comes along and disrupts things, it fits that idea in this kind of elegant way. It's like, intuitively we can kind of go, wow, it comes from this outer element here. But again, if it has an archetype, it exists within us in human beings, but we have not fully incorporated. What happens when we go into discord and strife? When that erupts and chaos results, that's the typical thing that happens in humanity. An evolutionary step would be that when there's discord and there may be strife about that, then instead of it erupting into chaos, maybe something else happens. But maybe, at least for now, let's just stick with now, the chaos is required for some new thing to be born. out of the structures that are breaking down, we observe chaos because the things we have relied on to give us reference point for what is our reality, as those things break down, it feels chaotic and we feel powerless. It's and that, my friends, is what is really strongly expressing itself right now. And with uh, as I said, with the caveat that I'm just beginning to study Eris, and but man, it sure does seem to be that when it shows up in astrology charts, which is showing up pretty strongly, for example, it showed up very strongly in the full moon just before the election. And there was the sense then that because the moon was exactly conjunct it in the sky, again, they come together. And the moon often is representative of the public, represents many other things, but it's this transmitter, and it is this sense of what we're bringing into our somatic experience and our instinctual self, our emotional self. And there were enough people at that point in time that wanted disruption. Now, whether they were voting for chaos or not is a different story, but they definitely didn't want the same old thing that was going on. And so it was about that time that the tides were shifting. And I want to emphasize once again that, these archetypes, especially if the outer planets, that we shouldn't give, they are personified allegories. In other words, they're taking something conceptual that does exist. It's part of our psyche, our collective psyche, but they're personifying it, meaning they're giving it a, a personhood. So to call chaos a goddess is metaphoric, it's allegory. It's not necessarily this feminine deity, like, there's a lot of people that's like, well, Eris, great, Eris is going to come and break up the patriarchy for us, because she's female. And it doesn't necessarily work that way. Um, uh, Eris is simply that element within ourselves that brings about strife and discord and ends up creating chaos, out of which something else can emerge. And so what we're going through may in fact break up patriarchy, the system, this system of hierarchy and of one being superior over the other notion. But it may not come in the ways that we expect, you know. And in some ways, and in hope, we can say that by this resurgence in extreme of toxic masculinity, that enough people will go enough already. And, we're not going to put up with it anymore. But there's equal possibility if we don't make choices, if we don't take actions, there's equal possibility that it can take hold again. That kind of energy could take hold again, and we'll be stuck with it for a while. That's why it's critical. So Eris showed up in that full moon before the US election, and it showed up again in just this past weekend with the full moon, in highlighting Eris and Chiron. So there's a little bit more to the story, and for those of you who don't know, Chiron is one of those icy worlds that got pushed inward and exists between Uranus, complete total freedom, and Saturn, the structures by which we have to live. And it's between that and it's bridging, helping us to bridge those things. But it's represented by the story of the wounded healer, this being who was born of the immortal, an immortal God, and of a mortal aspect of Mother Earth. And then taught humanity, and with the wound of his own making that he couldn't heal um, because it was magical, but also uh, he couldn't die because he was immortal, and so he lived with that wound. And that wound drove him to learn more and to teach more. And in that process, he's elevating the what exists in that process from a collective point of view. I'm skipping over this a bit, so hopefully you grasp it if you don't already know what Chiron is about. But it's about transcending limitations of our existing life and bringing about more freedom, more awareness, more consciousness. And so Chiron has this capacity through working through the wounding and learning more and teaching others and reaching a place where we're no longer identifying with the wound, but rather with the medicine that it gives us to offer others. And by so doing, with compassion and uh, and kindness and generosity, that we're all elevated in consciousness. So we all have our own peace. We all have our own wound, and we may never feel fully healed by it. But if we are in that space of, I'm going to allow it to help me progress, and by so doing, to help others, then if we all do that, then we're going to be elevating the consciousness of the planet. So now we've got Eris, we got this energy of, we're going to break things down. I promised I would tell you the story, which I will in a minute. But they are going to be coming together. And that does not happen very often. The last time was the early 1970s. Coming together conjunct, meaning those energies of chaos, of breakdown, and the energies of the wounded healer. That idea of how do we elevate consciousness through our own process of living with our wound, but offering what it teaches us compassionately to others. Okay? Those are the things that we are called on to do at this time. The chaos we're feeling because the things that we're used to, those structures we could count on, are breaking down. And the other things that I said about, take care of yourself, take care of your community, take care of your planet, and embrace what that sacred wound is that you have been given. If we begin to see it as a gift and have the humility and the compassion to work with it and share with others, that's how we are going to birth a new reality, a new earth. And so, I don't know, I'm going to check time.
Quarter to
Yeah,
nine. Quarter to nine.
okay. So I said I would share the story. Maybe y'all know it, but it's the one story that comes down to us from the Greeks about Eris is that, she was a goddess, like the other goddesses. And there was this wedding. Now I haven't reviewed this, so I'm not going to get every little name and every little I'm not going to get it all perfect for you, but the wedding, because I'm forgetting who the wedding was with or whatever. But all the important deities from Olympia were there, and the goddesses were there. Hera was there, Aphrodite was there, and Pallas Athene. So you've got wife. Oh, I suppose I don't know if Ceres was a part of that, but you got those representations of feminine divinity, the lover, mother, um, wife, and um, but they did, and when wisdom, Athena, very important one. But I think it was the three: Hera, the wife, and Athena, the wisdom, the daughter of Zeus, and daughter and sister, whatever. Because there's ways that they are co-equal, in this kind of mind twist. They're co-equal, and yet they can be a daughter and they can be a sister. But uh, and of course Aphrodite, the goddess of love. They're all there, and they did not invite Eris because who wants the goddess of chaos, the bringer of discord and strife? Who wants her at your wedding? Right? So she tries to crash the party and she gets pissed because she wasn't invited. And so to mess with them, she takes a golden apple and she tosses it in onto the table, and written on it says, to the fairest. So now the other goddesses are coming around and they're looking at this golden apple and they're going, oh, wow, to the fairest. Well, which one of us is the fairest? Is, you know, Aphrodite's, well, I'm the fairest, and so now they get into their little their little their arguments about who's the fairest. And they all believe that they are the most beautiful. And Zeus, and so they go to Zeus. Well, you should decide which one of us is the fairest that the golden apple should go to. And he's like, I'm not having any part of this. Yeah, I'm not getting into this mess. Decide which one of you are going to be the fairest. And so he gives it to this poor hapless fool, Paris. It's his job to judge. And so now the goddesses are starting to scheme and plot with each other. Like, how can we, convince us? Can we bribe them into, so um, Eris, the goddess of discord, not invited to the wedding of, yeah, okay. Um, so he is he's bribed and he accepts Aphrodite's bribe because she promises him that he can take the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, as his wife. Of course, Helen is married at the time, so this is like, all right, how's that going to work? Well, the short story of it is that he kidnaps Helen, and she becomes Helen of Troy because Paris is a Trojan, and it starts the whole Trojan War, right? And so what is Eris doing in this case? There's a certain order. It's personifying it, all right? It's taking it, it's not, like, okay, these are some catty women, but they use that as the tool to say that there is a certain order amongst the goddesses, and they really don't want strife and discord as part of that order. And yet it arrives anyway because some part of that order isn't working for everybody. She was uninvited. You go back to the notion that, Eris is outside the influence of Neptune. It's not fully integrated into our collective psyche yet, right? How do we handle strife? How do we handle when we're not in accord with someone else? And how do we handle when a chaotic situation comes up? We don't have good models for that yet. But and so in that case, in that story, there's the whole saga of the Trojan War and so on and so forth. But if you do her to take, or you could take many interpretations, but Eris at least is pointing out the hypocrisy, at least pointing out that there's something not equal going on here. It's like, wait a minute, I'm a goddess. How come I'm not invited? How come you can't accommodate me, the uninvited guest? So I'm going to mess with you. And to point out that there's an hypocrisy, there's some challenge that's going on here. And it's all a story about all these different things that go on within humanity and with the human psyche and so on and so forth. But there's some elements to that for us to learn from. And there's even some really great parallels to that, right? Even today, because there's the idea of, well, what's the worth of that golden apple that these goddesses should fight with each other and trick human beings into fighting with each other? Go steal somebody else's wife. Dude, what's up? You know, I mean, there's all kinds of that's in there. Uh, and so it tends to call into question. I can go on and on about this. There's lots of other elements to what Eris represents. I'm doing a little series with another astrologer friend of mine, and I'm probably going to put out a couple more things. Just my thoughts about it. I think we're still in discovery of what is it about. But this last full moon, we came from this place where it's just before Chiron, the wounded healer, is coming together with the goddess of chaos and strife and discord. And it just so happens that that Chiron is the same position of the United States Chiron. So the sacred wounding of the United States is involved here. And that doesn't come to completion, and it comes acutely to perfection, if you will, or perfection on April 22nd. And then Eris and Chiron come together later in May. It's very hard to predict what that will entail. But it does mean that we as a nation are visiting the wounds of what does it mean to strike out on our own, because this was from the Declaration of Independence. I hinted that there's many other charts that we could be looking at, the formation of our government. By the way, the lunar eclipse was directly on the sun. In other words, the day that the Constitution was formulated or was agreed upon was September 17th, 1787 at 4 o'clock. It was signed, and that position of the sun, the moon, the lunar eclipse, in other words, looking at the shadow, being aware of the shadow of what was created in that Constitution, and where is that settling deep in our own subconscious. That happened here just a few weeks ago. And now soon we're going to be revisiting how did we create a wound in our, it's something to maybe consider. And I still am sure I'm happy with a clear and distinct definition of what is the United States wound. Part of it is this exceptionalism and the idea of rugged individualism, and that we're creating something all brand new, and so we can't be, it's we probably most of us have met, and don't mean any insult to any Aries presence, but we know for some Aries they're so self-confident that they're arrogant. And self-confidence is part of Aries, of being able to be so self-possessed that you're willing to put yourself out there. That's a good thing. But when it comes to you're so self-confident that you're arrogant and you're not able to see other points of view or to incorporate them or include them, that's Aries energy run amok. And all of those could be components of the wounding of the United States, because we think we can, that we are, that we're all that, to use an old phrase, that we think we're all that. And so we're coming face to face with that. And the choices are, the opportunities have to do with, are we going to be able to come to terms with those initial elements of wounding, if you will, or where it wasn't quite right. It got incorporated into who we are, where some are thought to be superior. And so we think we are as a nation superior, or that we should be leading the world. There's all different kinds of things. I'm sorry I'm not boiling it down really succinctly. I want to give you prompts so that you think about it for yourself. Because there's also the notion of what will this mean, once again, for your own identity? And how, within this context, can you invite the elements of strife and discord within yourself? Where is there discord within yourself that may be creating a sense of chaos where it's not settled yet? And that with the wounding within yourself that is propelling you to become a better human being, to bring forth some kind of new element of consciousness. And how can they find, ways, can you use that to be healing the wounds of chaos? So now I'm trying to wrap it together to things I've said earlier. Take care of yourself, take care of your community, take care of your planet, elevate your consciousness with your identity. Who are you uniquely, and where are you wounded in that identity? How can you turn that into medicine for others, and bringing that into your community? And how can we heal the wounds of chaos? And as we progress, can do that, can then the chaos find a new resonant state? A metaphor from science is their superconductivity, where electrons flow freely, happens. It's considered almost a different state. It's not, where there's no resistance to electricity moving through it. It 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 happens in certain states. And what happens just prior to that is that the system, it reaches a level of chaos just before it finds a new level of coherence. And it takes one or two or a few that start to come into resonance with each other and become coherent. They start moving in coherence. And it isn't about individuals creating that or leading it. They're just finding this new system. They're finding the resonance within the new system. And then suddenly the whole system shifts because that new field of formation arises out of the chaos, out of some mysterious formation. So what should we be doing as individuals is finding that resonance within ourselves, calling on the dream that we want to bring into reality, using the medicine that our wounds are giving us in our identity, and taking care of self, community, and planet. And out of this eventually will emerge some new state of coherence. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Hope this happens in my lifetime.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? So it's just for us to do that, to find it within ourselves. But yes, of course. And if we don't, let me put it this way, if we don't do our part, now is pretty critical, these next few years. If we don't, then it's for sure not going to happen in our lifetime, and maybe not for those that come after us. That's why it's important. And whether it does or not is what I always say, is there any other choice? Who are you and what do you want to be? Is there any other choice? Are you going to become somebody that is not consistent with who you are? I'm not.
No.
I might end up dead for it. I mean, I don't think so, but maybe. A lot of people have died for their beliefs. And thank the Creator for them, because we wouldn't be here if they did not. Let's hope it doesn't have to come to that. But the willingness to put forth that much integrity and authenticity to who you are as a soul and who you want to be as a human being is being called for more than ever as things shift broadly in humanity across the planet and in consciousness. So yeah, I hope it happens in our lifetime too. I hope I live to see some of that change. And that's something else. And I don't know exactly where that is in the planets here, but yeah, I'm sure it does exist in there. Celebrate every piece that you can, you know.
Right.
Um, don't go into joy as a bliss ninny, you know, ignoring reality of what's going on. But man, we need to be feeding joy, you know, or our souls will die. You know, if we don't find that love and joy with each other, you know, the compassion and allowance to be, I don't know, I can go on and on. I'm sorry. Is there another question?
God. I've been waiting since how old was I? I think I might have been 14 or 15 when the Fifth Dimension sang that song, This is the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius.
Yes.
So
And
Interesting. Interesting thing about that. Oh, that was the dawning of the age of Aquarius. I don't know if that wasn't part of was that part of Jesus Christ Superstar? Do you
I
know?
don't
could
No,
think
be.
that's
so.
its own thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
okay. Yeah. Okay.
Mm. Um, the idea that two, is it atoms, two somethings resonate, and then it causes more resonance, which then out of the chaos, there is this new state created chemically. We are that. We are the ones holding the new energy and putting it out into the collective unconscious. And so, that's what I want our little theosophical group to be, the larger theosophical group to hold space, because we were taught ahead of time by the HPB predictions that this was coming. And her masters did all of that because this was coming, this shift. And the Aquarian individual state is empowered in the Aquarian age. So we use our intuition to know how to be and what to be, and expect the backlash. And that's what's happening. That was predicted, and I forget. Like I go back into the chaos. I sink back down, and then I go, I get my resonance back up to this knowing.
And so a key piece there is to bring that state of inner coherence into the chaos. And then there will be other individuals who will feel that resonance and come into coherence with you. It's when we create coherence, and I could go into the physical, the physics of it, which has this very direct parallel to metaphysics, but what it means to be in, coherent. Just to give you the simplest example, laser light is coherent light. They're all in the same phase angle, right? And it's coherent, working together. So it's this focused light. And so if you come in with your own coherence, and I know that's hard to do when it's chaotic, if we're paying attention to, every day there's something, right, that's throwing us off. And by the way, I'm not saying this is, oh, I got it perfected. No, I spent half the day in depression. Okay. So I'm lucky I'm here. But the reality is, if we can remind ourselves that, where's my own coherent state? Where's the dream I want to be living? And if you're radiating that whenever you can, then you're helping someone else come into their state of coherence. Or if you're in need of it, this morning, I mean, not to get personal, but I was not in a happy place, and I managed to work myself out of it by myself. But isn't it nice when we have other individuals or groups